Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second panel of the Linking and Learning web series of the Take Care Foundation. Today, we're going to be talking about reducing single-use plastics in development work. We have an exciting panel today who's very excited to share their experiences with you. So before we get started, I just wanted to ask everybody to make sure that they have their microphone on mute at all times, but that by no means that we don't want you to participate. So we want you to use the chat as actively as possible, share where you are in the world right now, share any initiatives that you're working on related to plastics. And also please note that we will be recording this session. So we're going to be recording it and then also posting it online. So please take note of that as we start with the session. So quickly on the agenda for today, so we'll have a quick keynote by our moderator, Pablo Montes Giannini, and then he will lead the discussion with the panelists, and we will finish with an optional networking session. So at 4 p.m. we will finish the panel, and we will move into a networking session for those that are interested. So do stay on this call if you want to participate further. So without further ado, I pass the microphone to Pablo.
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you to the Take Care Foundation for inviting me to moderate this very exciting panel. To kick it off, I will be providing a quick overview of the tourism plastic pollution problem, followed by an overview of the momentum and the opportunities that we see in the tourism sector to make a difference, and finally wrap up by highlighting the different fronts in which coordinated action amongst key stakeholders is needed. Veronica, can you please start showing the screen? As a matter of introduction, I'm Pablo Montes. I'm a private sector engagement specialist for UN Environment based in Paris. And part of a lot of the work that I do around private sector engagement is in the tourism sector, and more actively, I'm part of the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, which I'll give some context on it. So moving ahead to the next slide. This is I'll try to provide in a summary the plastic pollution problem of the tourism sector. It's a problem, plastic pollution in and of itself, that affects the natural and cultural capital of tourism destinations. To begin with, it's a massive flow of plastics towards the oceans, 8 million tons per year. That means there's a lot of consumption, and a lot of that plastic is ending up in the oceans, where 80% of the tourism activity is happening in coastal areas. That doesn't mean that the tourism sector is not also part of this challenging and kind of problematic situation, because we can see that there's up to an increase of 40% in marine litter, or in other words, plastic pollution in the oceans during tourism peak season. This, on top of this situation, it's a climate change issue that is connected to the consumption of plastics and to the improper management of this plastic waste. As 20% of it is projected that by 2050, 20% of the world's total oil consumption will be dedicated to plastic pollution. So in other words, there's a massive flow of plastic into the markets. A lot of it is ending in the oceans, in the rivers, in the lakes, and it's affecting the tourism sector. It's affecting its biodiversity, its richness, it's affecting its cultural assets, and it's also affecting the livelihoods, putting at risk the competitiveness of the destinations and their capacity to attract customers to enjoy all the multiple attributes that these destinations have. Moving on and taking a step back to see why is this such a huge problem around plastic pollution. And part of it is that the current system is a current linear system. You might have heard that expression, and it's basically a take and dispose system, where, as you can see on the slide, a lot of it is ending up in landfills that saturate and limit the capacity of destinations to deal properly with plastic waste and other type of waste. Another part of it is leaking or ending up in the environment, so affecting the ecosystems, the rivers, the mangroves, and all these rich ecosystems that we find in these marvelous destinations, or it's ending up being incinerated and affecting the air quality at the destination. Only a very small fraction of it is actually recycled. So tourism sector does have an opportunity to benefit from transitioning to a circular economy for plastics, one in which you can see in the bottom right of the slide, makes a better use of the materials, of the plastic products that are created, that reduces the consumption of virgin plastics, so reducing the connection and the impacts to climate change, and limits to a minimum the impacts of this plastic use to the environment. So the tourism sector does have a role to play in being part of this, of enabling this circularity in the use of plastics. Moving ahead to the next slide, we kind of took a deep dive to get a sense of how the sector, the tourism sector more specifically, was tackling this issue with, in comparison to other sectors, such as retail producers or consumer goods producers that have already that as on top of their agendas. And what was surprising, and surprising in the best way possible and reassuring, was that the tourism sector is already taking a lot of action. There's leadership, there's action taken on transition, on replacing plastic products and items. There's action taken on transitioning to reuse models. There's less so of an action on understanding how to include different types of plastics. So transitioning from single-use plastics to plastics that can be effectively recycled. So with that picture of what was happening and the direction, the positive momentum that was being created, there are three ways for action to be scaled up. One is to accelerate impact, taking the lessons learned from those leading the front to excite and facilitate the work to others that want to go on that journey of reducing plastic footprint. Second, to focus on the procurement to have a wider view, especially from the tourism business perspective, on the type of products that they can use, the alternatives that exist to plastic products, or the better plastics that they could use such that they're effectively recycled at the destination. And a third point is to enable this recycling and this proper managing to happen at the destination. More collaboration and coordinated efforts are needed on the ground. And this connects very nicely with the panelists that we will be having today. Moving ahead to the next slide, we realized that there was an opportunity to build on this momentum, to leverage other existing multi-stakeholder mechanisms, realizing that it's a complex problem that needs inputs from different types of organization and at different scales, and finding strategic partnerships, in this case with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, to plug into that effort and that initiative that was that is tied in the new plastics economy global commitment, where major global companies are taking ambitious action to reduce their plastic footprint and beyond that to tackle plastic pollution. So we moved ahead to create the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative to do precisely that. The Global Tourism Plastics Initiative is seen, in other words, as a framework for tackling plastic pollution, to take actions that will around elimination, around innovation, around circulation. Let me dig deeper into that and eliminate what I refer by elimination. And elimination is realizing and understanding that there are plastics, plastic items, plastic products, plastic packaging that are not necessary and that sometimes can be harmful to the users, or that can limit the capacity of the system, the waste management system, to properly recycle the other plastics that exist. There's also a huge need for innovation in terms of transitioning from single-use plastic packaging and items to reuse models, extend the life use of the plastic items. There's also a need to understand that there are different types of plastic items that can be used such that the circularity is enabled. And part of it is ensuring that there's ambitious targets on the use of this recycled content in the new plastic products and items and packaging that are being created. Fifth, there's also a need for this to happen in a collaborative manner, realizing that there are different actors in the value chain, in the supply chain, that need to play a role. And also there's a need for communication around what is happening, who's doing what, and what is the level of ambition and the level of success that is happening to increase the transparency and to enable communities and other interested parties to learn on how this progress is taken forward. Moving ahead to the next slide, we can definitely conclude that there is a role for the tourism sector to play in this collective solution, with each stakeholder playing a key role. Playing a key role at the global level, there's some action, but there's more specifically on the ground, at the destination. And this is what will connect us to the discussions that we'll be having today. with a fantastic panel that we have on board. So 5 fronts in which the tourism sector can enable the tackling of plastic pollution are by reducing the use of resources, the use of plastic pollution, and hence reducing the impacts that are created tied to that, helping raise awareness on the conservation of the ecosystems, on the pressure that is being put on this ecosystem, on the waste management infrastructure. Third, to influence and work together with suppliers to find alternatives, to find alternative products, but also alternative ways of providing a service such that it reduces the use of plastics. Fourth, working with governments to improve their waste infrastructure and to work on developing policies that encourage a proper management of plastics. And fifth, and putting this at the forefront, to create sustainable livelihoods and that result in long-term community benefit that is in harmony with nature. This, I would like then to close up my intervention by inviting you, as you can see in my next slide, to join 20 plus organizations, signatories from different types, so from accommodation providers, supporting organizations, tour operators, and suppliers that have decided and committed to take ambitious and coordinated action to tackle plastic pollution by 2025. Thank you for the time, and please looking forward to elaborating on this fantastic topic. Great. So now that I've attempted to give an overview of what the problematic is, what the action that is happening, what are the frameworks that are being set up, and what is the momentum that is building up, I would like to invite you to listen to Jo Hendricks from Travel Without Plastic, that has been taking this with her hands and taking the leadership on this topic through her organization. Please, Jo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pablo, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Some of you know me already. For those of you that don't, as Pablo said, my name is Jo Hendricks. I'm the founder of Travel Without Plastic, and we work with mostly hotels, accommodation providers, and tour operators, helping them to reduce single-use plastic throughout their operations. Personally, I've been involved in plastic reduction since 2011 in the tourism industry, but Travel Without Plastic was actually founded in 2017 when we took a specific focus on creating a range of tools and supporting documents to help hotels and accommodation providers in particular with practical recommendations around how to reduce plastic. We have very recently, through our sister company Greener Guest, just launched a free e-learning tool in collaboration with health and safety experts from Intertech Crystal, with a specific focus at the moment on reducing plastic and maintaining hygiene standards, which is obviously very important at this time. I'll be able to share some details of that later on. But moving on to a workshop that we held yesterday with some of the members of the panel that you can see with us today. We're also looking at how we can reduce single-use plastics in development work and through development projects, and some of the panel members will talk about their experience of that. But yesterday we came together for a workshop that was hosted by the TUI Care Foundation. I was joined by Kantal, Bongiwe and Suleiman, but also from a lady called Zoe Lenkovics, who is a waste professional from Waste Aid. And the output that we wanted to get from the workshop was really to understand what the participants need to be able to continue their work in development and livelihoods approaches, but also to be able to reduce single-use plastic, not just in their projects, but also through a wider outreach to the communities that they work with and that they benefit through their work. Before we did the workshop, we had a pre-workshop questionnaire, and we decided that we would focus on two themes based on the responses to that questionnaire. And that was really around product development. So that's products and services that utilize plastic, whether that's being recycled or upcycled into products for sale, but also into community engagement and looking at skills sharing. So we were able to identify some of the key plastics that are causing issues in specific destinations. and what the potential challenges are and solutions for collecting those and using them as a resource. And what really stood out is that there are some very well organized infrastructures and organizations that can collect certain types of plastic at the moment, but others, and the ones that are responsible for so much of the pollution that we see and that can be attributed to tourism, such as plastic bottles and packaging, they're really, really difficult to manage. And so the challenges there, what really stood out for us through the workshop was, how do we create livelihoods opportunities that need to work for small scale producers, but at the same time create scale in these destinations to help prevent pollution in the first place? And that is something that seems to be at the moment quite at odds, and we didn't get to the bottom of in the workshop. This was really just a start. So for instance, to explain it, the considerable effort and stakeholder engagement that's required to create a collection and waste management system in destinations where this doesn't currently exist, and specifically for hard plastics, the harder ones that are more difficult to manage, that doesn't necessarily link very easily into making crafts, for instance, that would be sold on a smaller scale, and that would help with the livelihoods approaches in tourism. Obviously, the craft issue or the way of dealing with plastics through craft is fantastic. We saw some really great examples of how plastic bottles are being turned into table mats, how tires from bicycles are being turned into jewellery and key rings and lots of other accessories that are actually very interesting to tourists. If they're provided as part of a tourist experience, providing that quality is managed very well. But despite that, they're not really taking huge amounts of plastic out of the environment, and nor are they really contributing to the root of the problem. So this is where we were looking at how these two areas can be brought together. We also discussed the price point. So bearing in mind what's happened with COVID-19 and the impact on tourism to destinations, where products such as craft markets, for instance, have relied on tourists, the issue there with continuing to sell those products when they're at a price point or they're a type of product that isn't as necessarily appealing to a local market. And so there needs to be a way to diversify and to think about diversification when we look at development, so that it doesn't just have this complete focus on tourism. And we saw a good example from one of the panelists who hasn't been able to join us today, actually, Cantal at Picala Bikes in Mexico. And they've diversified from having a tourism cycling excursion to actually becoming cycle delivery couriers. And they're looking at using that outreach to be able to talk to local people about the issues around plastic, especially those that are created from packaging and delivery, but also how they can use that opportunity to collect plastics in, and how they can do more in terms of infrastructure in Morocco. So they've been very adaptable. They've been able to adapt quite easily to the COVID-19 pandemic, whereas others are finding that more difficult to manage. So that is something we do need to consider. We also talked about the perception of recycled and upcycled waste and the marketing of that. And the general feedback was that many people who are buying products that are upcycled or recycled expect them to be cheaper, and are not necessarily valuing the amount of work and the amount of time that needs to go into those products if we're looking at the livelihoods benefits. And many of these organisations do have very good communications around the livelihoods benefits, but there's still an issue at the price point. One idea that was suggested by Zoe from Waste Aid, and that we found over our work in the past, is actually not to mention the sustainability credentials so much, but to mention the benefits, the practical benefits of the products, and why they are just as good as other products on the market, and when they're at the same price point. So actually not to focus quite so much on the upcycled or recycled marketing. As I said, we talked a lot about engagement with tourists. That's something that the businesses had already achieved in a very successful way. But one of the bigger challenges was the outreach in local neighbourhoods, the outreach with communities, how to involve local stakeholders, how to really approach governments, and some of those things that Pablo's has just touched on in terms of creating the scale. So if we really want to look at making a difference, that the smaller projects are fantastic, but the people within those projects themselves, we need to be able to create some opportunities so that they feel confident in engaging other stakeholders, but in a way that actually speaks to them. And we looked at some of the different approaches and the communications that we could take. So with local communities, for instance, rather than focusing on the issue with plastics, which most people know about anyway, and they see it, they live it daily, that doesn't motivate a great deal of change. This is something WasteAid has found throughout their work. But once you start to talk about the benefits of change or the impacts on health rather than the impacts to the environment, things that actually resonate with the communities there, that seems to motivate a willingness to be more involved in being part of the solution. And similarly to looking at an approach to, oh, sorry, Pablo, are you wanting to?
No, yeah, just I think on this point, Joe, that you're elaborating on engaging the different actors on the ground and getting them excited and talk to them in relevant ways. I think we can now start giving the floor to our panelists to break down what the situation that we described from a global perspective to get a better sense of the problematic of plastic pollution on the ground. What are the impacts that they're seeing on the livelihoods and on their environment? So if that's okay, we can, I'll come back to you, Joe, with a couple of questions, but at this point in time, I would like to give the floor to Suleiman, co-founder of Chaco Zanzibar, to tell us a little bit more on what is the plastic pollution or how is plastic managed in your location? What are the impacts that improper or insufficient plastic waste management is happening on livelihoods and on the environment? But please, before you start making your intervention, Suleiman, I would like to introduce yourself and the work that your organization is doing. Please, Suleiman, the floor is yours.
Yeah, my name is Suleiman, and I'm from Zanzibar. I'm from Chaco, Upcycling, Uplifted, and we are working with the plastic and glasses recycling. And more is like we quite trying to do a lot of plastic waste to make it a product out of that. And of course, it's like our knowledge, what we have now there, like in Zanzibar or in our workshop, is that we do had the PE plastic and we're recycling that. But we're also like busy to find out how to recycle those other type of plastic, like PET plastic. And actually it's like, the terms is like in Zanzibar and also about the tourism sectors. It is affecting us a lot about this plastic, and we're trying to communicate with hoteliers and restaurants and communities to understanding about the pollution of that plastic and give them a knowledge how we can working together and solve it together, that problem. And we do that right now, collecting and cleaning the beaches, but we still like having quite some difficulty of that, but we're still fighting and trying to do our best what we can to solve this problem. And if we work all of us together and we share each other, so we can solve this kind of problem. And yeah, I think that is the most of it. And we are looking forward also to the people who are watching us now, and they can give us also some more information how to recycle the plastic and share with us, so to come out of this pollution of the plastic in the world.
Okay, thank you, Suleiman. I would like now to give the floor to Alexandros to take us to another part of the world to share with us how is this plastic pollution problem experienced in Cyprus, and how is it affecting local communities, the tourism sector, the environment, just to get a sense of how this challenging problem is affecting you on the ground.
Thank you, Pablo, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this discussion, and thank you to Care Foundation for the invitation. I come from Cyprus, a small island in the southern east of Mediterranean. I'm the founder of the Sura, coming from the Spanish words. I was living in Spain. Tesoro, which is treasure, and basura, which is trash waste. So what we do actually is trying to make treasures out of waste. Our work focuses more into community-based solutions and how we can move forward into making some changes in the local and into a regional level. What we came out with is over the years we tried to monitor, as we live in a small island, where our garbage go. And although we have 3 or 4 companies taking care of our recycling bags, let's say, there is not actually recycling facilities happening in the island. So we take everything, we take our waste into another place. So it becomes a waste of somebody else. And that's not a solution, of course. So what we try to do is we try to find local-based solutions. How do we do that? We are part of an initiative that is happening globally. It's called Precious Plastic. This is an initiative created in 2013, which the idea is they have designed some machines that you can recycle plastic locally, and everything is open source, so everybody can take their designs, adjust it, and create a local recycling system. This is something that we are working on. We call it Precious Plastic Cyprus, and we try to encourage local shops, initiatives, NGOs, the public, governmental organizations and non-governmental organizations to all work together towards finding a solutions towards plastic. At the same time, we like to talk to people. I mean, we go out there, we see what's available. For example, we work closely with an organization that is called Idaliades. This is an organization formed from unemployed or retired women in the area of Dali in Cyprus. And what we actually do is they gather every Thursday and they create traditional crafts. And we gave them the idea of upcycling, since we have experience working and doing workshops through the years. So we try to combine our passion for crafts and upcycling. So they started doing, and we started doing actually together, bags made out of reuse material.
Fantastic, Alexandros. I would like to stop you there for a minute, as you have clearly showed one of the issues that you're facing, that Cyprus faces. So in particular, the lack of sufficient or waste management infrastructure at all, and how you're finding ways to tackle that. So I'm glad we're transitioning already, transitioning away from the glooming scenario into the solution-oriented conversation. On that front, I would like to ask Bongiwe to tell us a little bit more on how your organization, Africa Ignite, is tackling this issue, and highlight some of the challenges that you're facing. I know some of them are in connection to craftsman or craft making, as Alexandros just highlighted, but tell us a little bit more on how you're trying to deal with the issue on the ground through Africa Ignite, and some challenges that you're facing, such that others that are participating in this call can have an understanding of what are things to have in mind as social enterprises start tackling this problem upfront. Please, Bongiwe, the floor is yours. Please remember to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Pablo. I'm Bongiwe Mlandieni. I'm from Durban, South Africa. I work I work for an organization called Africa Ignite. We are based in Durban, but we work right across the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Our focus is mainly development, rural enterprise development, because we are faced with high unemployment rates right across the country. Our focus is mainly to support women and youth, marginalized communities, and we do this through craft and tourism as a vehicle for economic development. We've got 7 destinations within the province. We have seen an influx of tourists coming to those
Bongi, I think we have some trouble with your connection.
Nations and communities that are not benefiting directly from the vehicle to increase. So we have these physical sing local food. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can
Pablo?
hear you. We lost you for a couple of seconds. Please go ahead, Bongi. Please,
Sorry about that. So at the marketplaces, as I was saying, we've got a craft shop which produces local food, and we've also got craft that is made locally. And what we have tried to do as Africa Ignite is to come up with innovative new designs so that the crafters can earn a sustainable income. And one of the ways we've done that is to use recycled mealie bags to create a whole range of products that we have exported and also are selling locally. And in that way, it's sort of a dual purpose, because then we are promoting recycling within the destinations, but at the same time, we are preserving the culture of craftsmanship. We are still experiencing, though, a very low uptake on recycling, partly because within these destinations where we are based, they are primarily rural. A lot of the municipalities don't have waste collection services in those areas. And as a result, what happens is all the waste that is produced, including plastic, is then burnt in the people's homes, because there's no other way to manage the waste. So for us to entice our communities, the first port of entry is through promoting income. So if you're going to talk just about recycling, people are not going to take on the challenge, but they have to be incentivized in one or another way. And craft is just one of those ways that we are trying to do it, but we are very much open to other initiatives that we can take on, because we have about 400 tourism beneficiaries that we need to support within the 7 destinations.
Fantastic, Bongui. Thank you for this overview of the work that you're doing and the challenges that we're facing. I think you touched on a couple of points that are critical and are coming back into the conversation. So it's related to the infrastructure, technology that also was mentioned by Suleiman, and you brought it back to the tourism sector, because in these destinations where you're based, when the representative of the panels are based, tourism destination is a key driver, can be a key driver for sustainable development and a key driver to tackle plastic pollution. Now, I would like us to take a step back and come back to Joe, as you have a global picture on the multiple fronts that you have, Joe, and tell us a little bit of how the guidelines and the recommendations that are coming out to the sector are taking into consideration the role that social enterprises like the ones from Bongiwe, Suleiman, Alexandros are playing, and if so, how could they, other social enterprises, how can they best use these recommendations to frame their work and frame their action in this topic? Please, Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pablo. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see the amount of guidance that's out there at the moment, and a lot of it, I don't think necessarily considers all of these issues that face NGOs or development situations on the ground. And it was interesting yesterday to go through that conversation with the players to understand how complex this actually is, and whether they want to take the route of a scaled operation, or whether they want to take the route of a kind of local livelihoods and a smaller operation. And I don't know if a great deal of guidance out there exists at the moment to help organisations to follow that. The best that we've seen, and why we invited the lady from Waste Aid to join us yesterday, is that they've created some excellent toolkits that do really get to the heart of how to manage waste, in terms of, as a business, in terms of as a charity, but also in what needs to happen from an infrastructure perspective. I think we would highly recommend that if people haven't done already, that's freely available on the Waste Aid website, and it is the best that we've actually come across. It's very practical, and it really looks at all the different facets that development would need to consider. Apart from that, it's been quite difficult to find anything that I think is really relevant to this sector, and I think there's space for that.
Thank you, Joe. And I know you're one of the key players with whom you interact on a daily basis is hotels. How are hotels preparing themselves and allowing themselves to interact with these multiple players, either on the supplier end of things, looking for them and reaching out to them for alternative products and services, or on the waste management side to secure that whatever waste, in this particular case plastic waste, is properly managed or used in a different way?
Yeah, I think from the hotel's perspective, it can very much depend on the geography. So from a waste management perspective, a lot of the hotels that we work with that are European based, where generally there's a good waste management infrastructure anyway, there's an inherent trust that when the waste is taken, it will be recycled, it will be dealt with properly, and there's not really so much that goes on into checking where it's actually gone when it's left the premises. From work we've done in Southeast Asia, that's actually quite different. So we do see that a number of hotels there will contract with the informal waste sector in order to understand where some of their waste is going that isn't collected by either authorities or other means. So we see it's very different depending on the geographical destination that a hotel is actually situated in. And it's probably the same to say for looking for alternatives, to be honest with you. There's a trend at the moment, I think, to replace single-use plastic with other single-use items. And one of the biggest questions that we get from hoteliers is, where do we find alternatives? Not necessarily how do we take single-use, whether it's plastic or not, out of our operations. So that there isn't necessarily a waste reduction focus. It's kind of, how do we take away plastic? What should we replace it with? And one of the key things that we're really trying to do through our work, as you know, is to replace those products with processes and procedures. And we are starting to see now that there's more of an appetite for that. I think in some cases that's been because of COVID. I think it's forced people into looking at operations and processes. In some ways it's helped us, so that we've seen individual miniatures, for instance, in bathrooms are now very much, people are kind of encouraged not to use those at all. But at the same time, we've seen new single-use plastics come into play, so gloves, masks, miniature hand sanitizers, those types. But I think there's more awareness now, and I think that people are open to the fact that we do have to change.
Yes.
And there seems to be, there's an element, with the hotels we're speaking to now, they're saying previously we would have conversations and people would say, we just can't do this, it can't be done. And things that we thought couldn't be done are being done, and they're being done very quickly because we're being forced to respond. So I think there's a good opportunity there, and there's an increase in interest to do so.
Fantastic, Joe. So this clearly confirms the momentum that is building up, the appetite that is in the tourism sector, in the tourism businesses, to change the tide and deal with this problematic that will come and eventually will affect the destination and its competitiveness, and on top of that, the livelihood of communities. So let me take back it to Suleiman. to reflect on, now that we see this momentum happening on the market, that there's this push from the government in different ways, but there's some certain push from the government, or sometimes a carrot from the governments to allow the tourism sector to go in the positive direction. How do you think the work that is done by social enterprises like the one you represent, the one that you lead, how can this type of action be scaled up to, in the end, scale up the impact and the contribution to such a complex issue? Suleiman, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, actually, in terms of talking about the government, as we say, like the European, they're more like understanding and so, but our governments, they're not really like, they don't want to understand. I don't know, the other side, they do understand, but to give you a hand on that section is a little bit difficult. But as I said, that on yesterday, what we had the conversation, I said like, I'm really like digging deep to work, I watch to the government and so, and really like asking a lot from them. And also working with the Ministry of Environment to inform them about the plastic waste and so, and we can working together. And at the same time, I'm also like, we now working with the University of Zanzibar to watch about how can we do and solve this kind of problem. And they're willing to understand now and working together, that is a good part of it. But of course, there is challenges on the government side or municipalities to work on it and get understanding about this. So that is most of the issue what we're facing now.
That's good, Suleiman. I like that you mentioned how kind of we recognize the fact that it's not a single-handed effort. There's a multiple number of hands that need to come together to pull this forward. And also like that you mentioned how you're engaging the academia to bring some knowledge and to have a further reflection, a comprehensive and structured approach to deal with the problematic that is particular in each way, in each location, in each destination, as we have seen today. Bongiwe, can you tell us, I know that one of your interests from Africa Ignite is how to scale up. You're building a network across different parts of South Africa. I'm sure you have reflected on how to scale up your work. Can you tell us a little bit more on how to scale up the activities of Africa Ignite in the context of dealing with issues like plastic pollution, and also put that on top the need for improved livelihoods that have been strongly impacted by COVID? So please, Bongiwe, the floor is yours. Please, looking forward to hear your thoughts on this topic, how to scale up.
Sure, Pablo. With the Wow Zulu model, it is actually a social franchise, and it's a flexible model. It's replicable. It has been launched as a base case replicable model for South Africa for community-based tourism. So we have engaged with stakeholders, because initially it was focused primarily on the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and now we've scaled to other provinces within the country, and we're looking at the brand changing it to Wow Africa, because obviously the Zulu element, it only speaks to South Africa, and we've already started engaging with partners in Kenya, Ghana, and Zambia. And in that way, because we've piloted it here in South Africa, whatever lessons that we've learned, we can then replicate. And in terms of the initiatives about recycling, we can then create ambassadors within the network that can then promote recycling in the different destinations. Because it's one thing if the messaging, which we spoke a little bit about with Joe yesterday, it comes top down from the government. People are less likely to follow suit unless if there are levies that are imposed on people. But otherwise, a bottom-up approach works far better, and creating ambassadors within these networks and creating value. People must see the value of recycling and the fact that within our destinations, people come primarily for the beautiful landscape, the natural environment, recycling, removing pollution and waste, and then ensuring that tourists will continue to come to these destinations. And then it's to their benefit to actually keep the destinations clean so that they have a sustainable income. So we're trying to get the model perfected so that we can then take it a next step and into Wow Africa. And I mean, it could go beyond the continent, but for now we'll keep it to Africa.
I bet you have some partners on the call that can help you with that. So I think highlight a couple of points: the ambassadors, the concept of ambassadors, and the concept of raising awareness. So making the connection plastic pollution and the risks to destinations, the connecting plastic awareness raising and empowering with holding each other in a positive way accountable, because, well, as mentioned by Suleiman, all of us need to come together. I would like now to transition to Alexandros to tell us a little bit in your context. So you have, someone would say that you're in a privileged setting, being in an island, perfect test scenario. How do you see the work that you're doing and the work that other social enterprises are doing on the topic? How can it be scaled up?
I do value a lot the point of education. For example, we wouldn't know what to do with all the plastic if we wouldn't know what plastic causes. I mean, now you can see the effect. If you live in an island like here, if you go to the beach one day, you can see the effect of human and the effect of plastic into the environment, and in an extent, the effect of tourism. But living in an island, yes, it's a little bit more difficult to move things, I think, as you have difficulties in transportation, a lot of things that are a priority for a bigger country or to the rest of Europe, if I may say, that most countries are connected. Here you have to take a ferry or a plane, and there's a lot of difficulties when it comes to transaction. But yes, I do believe that a lot of local initiatives, small initiatives, and community-based projects manage to scale up and spread the awareness of the topic. I do believe, and I mention again, that to fight pollution, education is a very important tool. And to be able to educate local communities, spread the word, show actions, organize workshops, this is something really, really important to scale up and to spread awareness on the topic.
Thank you, Alexandros, for your insights and reaffirming the point that education is key in greasing the machine and allowing a common understanding to be built on the need for action. I would like to bring back the associated to education. There is a point on access to information and how access to information, either on best practices or how to deal with a particular issue, can be complicated. So now slowly transitioning to the Q&A session, there's a question coming from Lydia on how to go about reducing single-use plastic bottles in areas where tap water isn't suitable for drinking. What are the points to have into consideration? How is it that the issue of plastic water bottles is the same everywhere? I would like to, on this point, to ask Joe on how you deal about this question, the different hotels where you are. Some of them are islands, for example, where you're based, and others are in other parts of the world that would have different settings in terms of access to public service and water, safe drinking water.
Great, yes, thanks, Pablo. I think the first key thing to understand is where tap water isn't suitable for drinking necessarily, but it is suitable for filtration. So there are so many opportunities now to be able to fit water filtration that can then be served either from a refill, for instance, and there are some new recommendations around how to do that hygienically, if guests are serving themselves. So there are foot pedal operated refill systems now, or there are zero touch operated refill systems. And they can be implemented quite easily and quite cost effectively, actually. So most of the water filtration companies that operate globally will do it on a kind of rental basis. So you don't need to find an initial upfront amount of money to invest. You can pay that off. And when you look at the cost of buying water in plastic bottles, and sometimes the cost of disposing of the plastic bottles, depending how the waste collection works in your destination, the payback can be pretty quick, and in less than a year in some places. Depending on the type of organisation that you are, you can offer water refills at a charge. You could offer a water refill that's free if you buy a coffee in a place, for instance. That's something we were discussing with Bongway around the craft markets and the restaurants in the craft markets. So just ways to get people to come in and think about how they can use less water. And there are also ways to do that if you're on excursions that are moving around. And that's one of the biggest issues, is itineraries. So where people are not necessarily staying in an accommodation for 7 or 14 nights, but they could be moving every day. They could be out on safari. They could be quite far away from water sources. But again, there are ways to input filtration in some of the cafes that you stop in, some of the different places that are involved in excursion itineraries. Everybody could be incentivized in some way so that they're prioritized if they have plastic reduction by the tour operators that would take them on. So I think it's important just to make that distinction between water that's safe to drink and water that's good enough to filter, and then go for the filtration.
Okay, thank you, Joe, for providing this overview on how to deal with this particular situation around water. And if I might highlight 2 points from your intervention. One is a technology angle, and there's different suite of technologies that are available for that purpose. But there's also another element that is more connected to the innovation on how to make it feasibly from a financial perspective, to avoid some of the barriers that in some occasions are linked to an upfront cost or to maintenance or different setups. So there's a need and an opportunity for innovation on the actual deploying of these technologies, such that it makes business sense. And I think the audience that we have and the panelists that we have crafting their ways around such challenging issues, there's room for there and to explore new ways of adopting these technologies that exist. So with that in mind, and apologies for the questions that have come at the last minute, we're transitioning to the wrap up by panelists. So I would like to give the floor to Suleiman for some couple of words, 2 minutes, Suleiman, for some final words of encouragement to other social entrepreneurs like you, or others that interact on a daily basis with social entrepreneurs, on how to go about tackling plastic pollution such that the welfare and the well-being of livelihoods is secured in a sustainable and long-term way. Please, Suleiman, the floor is yours. Some final words.
Yeah. Actually, my advice, and I'd like to share with the whole social entrepreneurs, or with the NGOs, or with the whole world and all those other organizations, that is like we really have to work together to focus on this problem what we're facing now in the world. But at the same time as what we're talking about, we're also social entrepreneurs, and which is like we can create the jobs out of that to recycling the plastic and the recycling also other ways, but especially plastic, which is the biggest problem we have. And I think it's we can do with all of us. And of course, there is a lot of potential of that, and we can clean up the world, which is, I'm living in a Zanzibar island, which is, I love my island, and I think there is a lot of tourists who love this island. So I think we can protect it, and they can also enjoy their holidays when they come. It's going to be a clean island, clean environment for their own health and for the whole world health. So I really like if you guys, all of us, we join together and go for it, and we'll make it also like a better sustainable income for our people. Thanks a lot for that. Sure. And thanks for the TUI Foundation to give us these opportunities.
Thank you, Suleiman, for those words of encouragement and exciting all the audience that we have today to find others to reach out to solve this situation together. Now, Bongiwe, I would like for you to say some final words on either advice to other fellow social entrepreneurs that are listening to us, or others that deal with social enterprises or that can benefit from engaging a social enterprise in tackling the plastic pollution issue at the destination. Please, Bongiwe, the floor is yours.
Hi, Pablo. Sorry, I missed the last bits of your message, just because I'm having network connectivity issues. Can you just repeat that? Sorry.
Okay. Yes, sure. With pleasure. Can you please share some words of encouragement or advice to other social entrepreneurs or others that work with social entrepreneurs on a daily basis?
Sure. One of the key lessons that I've taken away, especially from the workshop that we had with Joe and Zoe, is being able to communicate different messages to your different markets. When it comes to craft, I posed a question around, products that are upcycled, and should we actually be telling consumers that? Because then, in essence, in some instances, people then think, you should be charging less for that product. So it's something that I hadn't really given much thought to, but communicating different messages to different consumers. People that are more, I can't think of the right word, but like green, would appreciate the product and how it's made. And some people actually don't need to know that messaging. But what is key is the people behind the product, the people that have made the product and the impact, and also communicating the measurement of that impact. For example, with our organization, we say we support over 1,000 women crafters, and that is our key message. The fact that the product is recycled is secondary, and for some consumers, it isn't actually important for them. So communicating the right message is key for your product or your brand.
Thank you, Bongiwe. Thank you for that reflection. And now, Alexandros, if you can share some views, some final advice for others that are doing work similar to you and the other panelists.
Yes, it's very interesting to read the comments as well. And of course, a lot of issues are different in every country, but for sure I would like to say that there is solutions and there is solutions out there. So we should not think always of reinventing the wheels, and at the same time we should not be try not to be stuck when we face an issue, and when we try to encourage, let's say, hotels or restaurants to stop using single-use plastic and so on. I know it's hard because for them, that's how they learn to do business. So what I find very, very profiting is if you bring together peoples and experts in different fields, and also if you bring together hotel managers, and if you mix people from the different backgrounds and diversify the different point of views, then with a good monitoring and facilitation, you can find a solution on these big problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandros. And great. So with that in mind, coming to the hour of allotted for the webinar, I would like to thank the panelists. I would like to thank the Twicker Foundation for this opportunity to discuss the issue, and wrap up with some of the takeaways from the discussion from this last intervention. So there's clearly, it's a challenging setting that has consequences on the ground in different ways. But as Alexandros mentions, there's already solutions that exist. There's someone already somewhere in the world going through the same challenges and that have been able to tackle. So there's a need for coming together on collaboration, on sharing the knowledge. Second, there's also a need for leadership from social enterprises, the government, the tourism businesses to unlock and put effort on their hand to show the willingness to collaborate, to come together, and make sure that the challenge is framed in the proper way. So make the connections on an issue with the economic consequences, and in the end, the consequences with livelihoods. And finally, to ensure that the process and how different actors are coming together and the impacts that are happening on the ground has a lot of transparency, such that tourists, but also community members and government officials have a good understanding of how the opportunities are being benefited from, and how the destination is kept in a healthy way, in a healthy status, and how livelihoods are benefiting from tackling plastic pollution. Thank you all for participating in the webinar, and thank you again for the Tweaker Foundation for organizing this learning and linking space.
Thank you very much, Pablo, and thank you very much to our lovely panelists and for everyone participating and actively writing in the chat. It's great to see that everyone's so engaged in this really important topic.